Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to respond to a message I received from Jason Madore concerning not the survival of records in the future, but the machines themselves. It's an interesting thing, the progression of the old machines from the period when they were new and technological wonders to the point when they were looked upon as junk, and today we're looked upon as somewhat historic curiosities. You know, I can recall, now I've explained, I started collecting records in 1969. My first record I got in 1969 that was unique and old. Didn't know a doggone thing about those records, but of course I learned. I didn't understand anything about machines. But once I did learn rudimentary information about the machines and records, I started going on the prowl. Now, you'll have to remember, in the early 1970s, most people looked at old phonographs and old records as junk. I can recall so often seeing chopped up Victrolas piled up on trash day for big garbage. I can remember my grandparents smashing up their Victrola. I didn't know what it was at the time, but of course I would know later on. I can remember many old houses where they had the old phonographs in the attic. And when the old folks died, those machines were often just tossed out the attic window into a dumpster. I remember going on a rescue mission once, saving an orthophonic Victrola, at least parts of it, that was sitting in the trash. And this was probably around 1976, 1977. Because basically, they were junk. You went to the Salvation Army, there was all a mess of them. I couldn't give them away. They were junk. See, an interesting thing happened as the 70s went along. In 1977, you had the 100th anniversary of the phonograph, and people started to become aware of it. There was also a massive revolution in Japan of interest in early sound recording. And as far as they were concerned, money was no option. And they were spending tremendous amounts of money on records and phonographs. I can recall having a group of phonographs that I had bought for a modest amount of money, and having a Japanese collector come in and offer tremendous amounts of money for what I had, and I was very happy to sell them. That made the price go up. All of a sudden, junk shops and the Salvation Army no longer had those machines. I remember going into antique shops and seeing them for $25, and they couldn't sell them. I remember going into New Milford. It was around 1972, 1973, going into an antique shop, and there was a floor model Victrola, probably a Victrola 16, and on top of it was a Victrola 9. And collectively they were $45, and they couldn't sell them. Now, everything changed. But think of how many machines we lost. We lost the vast majority of them. The early Berliners and things like that, most of those were lost. The early Victors, most of those were lost, along with most of the records. It was junk. It was old-fashioned stuff. And when you think of the early cylinders and the early cylinder machines, they were somewhat fragile. And those records, they were fragile in themselves. And you look at them wrong and they would crack. So many were thrown out. So many were junk. So many were used as target practice. Think about that. People with pellet guns would throw them up in the air and shoot them. And everything changed in the later 1970s. All of a sudden, they started to become popular. And all of a sudden, everyone started collecting phonographs. And there was a massive revolution, and that's the period of time when I started. As I said, I got my first old records in 1969, and I got my first Victrola in 1972. And I was really enthralled with it. I broke it. I learned from it by breaking it. You never learn from your successes, you learn from your failures. And from the failures that I did with the Victrola, I made it better. I found crazy glue could do amazing things. So, in time, I had collected a whole mess of machines. These days, I'm getting rid of machines because I've discovered I don't want them. I don't want these heavy reproducers with needles. I'll have a portable machine or a couple of portables. But the big floor model Victrolas. I got my first Victrola 16 in 1976. I still have it, by the way. But something? I've had it now for 40 years. And it's got to go somewhere. It's just too big. And today, people are downsizing. People don't have the space they once had. And so these massive Victrolas, they've gone the way of the dodo. Of course, there are people that collect, and there are people that collect hundreds of these things. There are museums. There are collectors in Korea now. There's one of the largest museums on phonographs is in Korea. There's a lot of collectors in Japan. There's a lot of collectors in China. These machines are traveling all over the world. But I happen to receive a message from Jason Madore, and who I have talked to many, many times. And he said he's not concerned about the records surviving, he's worried about the machines. There is a point to that. I don't know how many machines will survive, or survive in a good working fashion. I've worked very hard talking to the people when I was young who worked on a lot of these machines, and I learned how to work on them. I learned how to fix things by watching them. And, I have to tell you, these Victor machines, the Columbia machines, the Brunswick, at least they have a weight that moves. A lot of them are cutting lathes, and they do irreparable damage to the old records. And for a while, I was a very strong advocate of playing the old records on the original machines. And that's cute. But one has to start to think that those records, in many cases, are very hard to replace, and that a light tone arm electric player is a far better thing to play. So as time goes by, and as I mentioned before, I talked about the year 2077, with the 200th anniversary of the phonograph. I have a feeling, just a gut feeling myself, is in the year 2077, there is going to be an interesting and profound resurgence in the arena of early phonographs. And people are going to want to find them, see them, play with them, see what they were like. Because they're going to be so foreign to the people of 2077. Or let's just go to 2177, the 300th anniversary of the phonograph, where there's no limit to the time. These machines will last. Hopefully. If they're not played, the gears can get all messed up. And, it makes one wonder, as time goes by, who's going to fix these things, and who's going to know how to fix these things, and who will find it worth their while to fix them. There's enough collectors today and enough machines where people have had industries and businesses in fixing these machines. I've done it myself at times. But things will change as time goes on, and that these machines that were wonderful objects of technology and later junk, later made into liquor cabinets, will become objects of curiosity in the field of ancient technology in the future. I am sure of it. I am sure there's going to be a resurgence in the interest on the early phonographs. They will become extremely valuable. And I'm just wondering, in that period of time up to 2077, how many are going to vanish? How many are going to be lost? How many are going to go the way of the dodo? I mean, even to this day, there are collectors that buy machines and they're a little beat up, so they tear them apart and they use the parts and they burn the case. Well, there was a lot of them made. Yes, indeed. A lot were made. But still, what will be in the future? Who knows? I've thought further on this whole idea of recordings and records. I talked about cylinders and discs going back to the early Berliners. Of course, in the year 2077, the whole idea of the LP record will be looked upon as an ancient artifact too. Got to remember, LP records in their vinyl form, as they called them microgrooves at the time, came out around 1948. And what is important about that is that from around 1948 until, well, actually to the present day, there's still companies making LPs. They have been a major part of our sound recording activities. Of course, also, you have CDs. Now, I'm of a mind that probably in the year 2077, not many CDs are going to be working. Tapes, they'll be gone. What will survive are the records. What will survive are the cylinders, the 78s. But the tapes, the CDs, I wonder about some digital forms of recording, what their longevity is, and I'm no expert in that. As I said, I started collecting records in 1969. I understand old technology. But I have to tell you, when it comes to many new technologies, I'm baffled and confused. Many people are, probably. One last thing to mention about all of this is hopefully the machines will last. Hopefully respect for the sound recordings and the machines will exist. So that as time goes by, there will be always, hopefully, a digital record. Hopefully, the physical record will survive. I can't see how many of these early recordings, why they won't survive hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm hoping that perhaps 500 years from now, that someone will be thrilling to the voice of Caruso, or hearing Silas Leachman, or the Metropolitan Orchestra under Frank Banta making a record in 1902. And I'm hoping that people all those years from now will find wonder and majesty in that whole field of early recording, and hopefully have the same kind of affection that we ourselves have in this present day. As I have said before, it will be a fascinating thing to see. I'd love to be a fly on the wall. But I'm sorry to say that I was born long before the phonograph hit its 100th birthday. And so I will not be around for its 200th. And maybe a few of you who are listening to this will be there. And I hope that many of you push and work hard to preserve the machines and recordings to share for future and yet unborn generations.